I had no idea there were so many guys that kind of thought the same way I did. I was blown away. We put up that ICAST is dying video, and there were a lot of different responses, and I appreciate all of them because it actually created a really interesting conversation, dude. But I thought people would be a lot more like pissed at me for the things that I said, and there'd be a lot more angry people. On the contrary, like, you guys were really supportive, and a lot of you guys kind of thought the same thing or along the same lines about some of the shortcomings and some of the changes that needed to be happening at ICAST to make it more relevant, to give it its luster, to kind of bring it back to the forefront. And there were some comments that I wanted to kind of respond to and expand on. So what we're gonna do in this video is I grabbed a bunch of your insights, dude, and I put them on paper. I'm gonna run through some of the comments that I think needed a response, as well as the comments that really offered kind of a different or alternative perspective that added to kind of the things we were talking about in the first place. So hit that like and subscribe button. Let's get to it. So first things first, my main point was opening it to the public. Lojo Fishing, dude, who's far more big time than I am, even supported the idea. He was like, totally agree with you, brother. ICAST should be open to the public. Now, granted, that's from an influencer perspective, and that's what was interesting too. There were some guys from more of like a vendor or a brand perspective that had some conflicting views that said, hey, this is a trade show. It's meant to be a trade show. It's meant to be closed to the public so that we can do deals. You know, we can organize things and make things happen. So I agree with that. But the concept behind what I'm kind of framing up and what I'm talking about is it needs to change a little bit. And one of the most interesting compromises that came out of this is a lot of the vendor brand kind of guys mentioned that, you know, the public would disrupt us like doing deals, right? Doing, you know, things, buying, selling, kind of meeting those vendors that are going to sell our product for the rest of the year. And that's totally fair. But the interesting solution you guys provided was, why don't you go for like 3 days? And then go for like 2 days, like on the weekend, and have the public come in, have the public interact with the brands. Because one of the things that was totally apparent throughout the whole video and the comments that you guys offered is there's a growing disconnect between brands and between really just that angler public. And I think one of the things that ICAST could provide if it was open to the public is sort of a connection, an ability to get to know some of these brands and the faces behind them and the grassroots reps, the guys, the pros, you know, really make that connection and kind of redraw that relationship and kind of rekindle it. And I think where you fuse that sort of vendor brand and then end user brand relationship is really in the same event. You know, you don't need multiple events. It's already like one of the biggest expos of fishing in the world. And so if you could bring those two things together, you'd actually be solving like one big problem. The last thing, and this has probably got some of the most traffic, there were a couple comments of things are just too expensive, especially boats and electronics. And you know what? I'm going to agree and disagree. There was a lot of, I guess, negativity about, hey, you know, tournaments or expensiveness is wrecking fishing. I'm going to play devil's advocate for a minute, and I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to kind of be that guy, right? One, things are more expensive. That's a general thing across all kind of commodity items, right? Inflation, cost, they've gone up, right? And the cost to make those things. That's one thing that it doesn't get talked about. The cost to actually make, produce, source, and make all that stuff happen. All that back-end stuff has all gone up in price, and then it gets transferred to the consumer. That's true, 100%. The other thing is, it's sort of like a natural sort of progression of markets. You have something that's popular. Well, how do you grow it, right? You grow it by adding more products, by adding more dimensions, adding more electronics, adding more SKUs, adding more plastics, more baits, more stuff like that. So you can fault kind of the brands to an extent, but the fact is the brands want to grow. They want to grow the sport, and they want to grow their sort of armament, right? Like what they offer, what they can sell to consumers, I guess, to be totally simple. It's a simple kind of supply and demand thing. You know, if there's more things to offer, they can possibly create more demand because people want more stuff. Like when you actually look at it honestly, would you rather have more fishing stuff or less fishing stuff, right? However, that does, you know, create more niche categories like electronics, like some of these specialty baits and things like that. So it does raise prices. The one thing that I'll note is there's a lot of negativity on pricing in that, but I think the one thing a lot of anglers sort of failed to see, and I remember this because I was kind of like pre-internet to an extent when it came to buying fishing lures. You know, back when I was buying stuff, there was pretty much like Bass Pro, right? And a lot of times you're buying from a catalog, right? It wasn't even online sales. Then it transitioned to online sales. The availability of fishing products was very limited, which also kind of limited competition. You had your bait shop, you had your Bass Pro. Tackle Warehouse showed up, disrupted the market. All of a sudden there's lower prices, quick access to a lot more different kind of brands, different baits, new school stuff, weird stuff, things that you don't have in your region. And that's expanded even more. There's a ton of fishing products on Amazon. There's a ton more things that you can get that can be gotten like at lower price points. You can get generic things, you can modify them. So I think for as much as there's like a negative connotation to all the like availability, I guess, or all the new offerings, there's also a positive thing. You can kind of be that smart consumer and hunt out some very cool deals, some very unique items, and some very sort of customizable products that, like, to be honest with you, 15, 20 years ago, that wasn't happening. Things are expensive, and in my general opinion, there does need to be sort of a, I don't know, maybe a recognition. I don't think prices are ever going to come down, but I think one thing that brands, and I think they're doing it too, the $100 price point reel is a great example. They need to find a middle ground where they can reach that kind of like entry level or average consumer, and they can do it with a product that offers quality, that's not junk, but offers a price point that's accessible, right? And I think that's something these brands are recognizing. Boats are getting expensive. That's why we see this giant like rise in kayak fishing, and then that's getting expensive too. But the fact is, in any market, demand will create sort of an adjustment. And I don't think we're seeing it quite yet, but I do think it's kind of gradually coming. I think one of the things that's going to happen, with sonar and stuff, is there's going to be a far more mobile approach or an integrated approach, with maybe using your phone and having a transducer that you plug into it, which will lower the cost overall of the hardware. There's various kind of ways that things are happening in small ways in kind of little edges of the market that are going to lower those prices. But I think the fact remains is we're still suffering from some of those elevated, inflated prices. Not because people are greedy, maybe to an extent that's happening, but the costs of producing and creating, the fact is that they've gone up. And the cost of shipping, that's one thing nobody really talks about, is the cost of moving these products around. The fact is you don't pay just for that product. That product didn't just come there from the manufacturer directly to there. There's a lot of stops that incur costs because you're shipping a product from one point to another, whether it's a distributor, whether it's something about the way it's produced, it needs to be worked on here and then worked on there. There's all these different costs in shipping that are increasing the costs that really end up at the end user or the consumer level. And a lot of that is related to shipping because it's booting up that basic kind of commodity cost. I think these brands are recognizing that to an extent, but I also think they're recognizing there's a market for some of these higher end, more specialized products, but they're also coming to the realization that they need to sort of have a middle ground, right? Something that's accessible to the average entry-level kind of angler, somebody who's just getting started. They can't alienate that person, and I think that's the feeling that a lot of guys have. Is they're guys who want to have fun, they want to get out and fish, but they're being alienated by the price points and the accessibility of the stuff that's out there. And in reality, it's going to take a little bit of time, some market shifts, and some creative kind of solutions to actually solve that problem. That's what I think. I'm not important, but those are kind of my takes on it. I try to balance out understanding, what's the brand's perspective? If you're making something, you're trying to make some money, you're trying to participate in sort of a passion project, because that's what it is for anybody who's making lures, selling lures at a tackle shop, anything along those lines. But they're there to make money. There's no doubt about it. You can't deny that. But also preserving that connection and that grassroots feel that we have in fishing. Fishing's a unique sport. It's different than any other sport out there because it's a hobby and it can be competitive, but probably the vast majority of people participate in it on a fun level, right? It's something that engages us with the outdoors. It's a way to connect with other people in a way that I think is totally unique. And it's changing, but I think people don't want to lose that feeling of it being just kind of like a good old-fashioned pastime, you know? And I think that's where some people are kind of really having some gripes with this, and there's ways to solve it. It's never gonna be the same. That's something that I try to remind to everybody. Everything always changes, right? And you have to be open and deal with change, but it doesn't mean it needs to 100% change the entire culture or the entire feeling that you get from an activity, from a sport, from a passion, right? But at the same time, it's going to evolve. And sometimes that evolution can actually help to sort of regain that feeling or create a new feeling that's comparable, that expands that sort of, that grassroots feeling, that connectivity with the outdoors, connectivity with your buddy, that topic to relate to, that thing that we love doing, chasing the bass, you know, trying to catch big fish and that. So I think we as anglers have the responsibility to be a little more open to some of the evolution and some of the changes, but also the brands need to be a little more, I guess, oriented towards addressing kind of that grassroots, sort of your average angler who wants to participate, but you know, the price points are alienating them, the accessibility is becoming an issue, and they have to repair that relationship. And I think that's really important, and I think it's something that's doable. I don't think it's gone, you know, beyond the clouds, beyond the sky. That's my opinion though. I definitely enjoyed your opinions. You guys had a lot of really constructive perspectives. Guys who are vendors, own tackle shops, brands, all drop comments on the video. So I wanna hear more of what you have to say, because I know the guys at ICAST and some of these brands are looking at this video and looking at the comments because they want to know what to do different. They don't want to alienate their brand. They don't want to be, you know, cast out. They want to make money. They want to participate in the sport. Nothing wrong with that. So they're looking for opportunities and creative solutions to do it. So let's give them some. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I want to see your comments below. Thank you guys. We'll see you hopefully back out on the water instead of bitching about ICAST. Later, my homies.